Almighty Father in heaven, in the name of your Son, our glorious and victorious Savior, Jesus Christ, we humbly ask for your blessing upon our worship of you on this, your holy and sanctified Sabbath day, so that we may grow more in our knowledge of you, our love for you, and our obedience to you. And I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written that no man knew but he himself. And he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. And out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, and he treadeth the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God. And he hath on his vesture and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Amen. Just a quick technical note before we begin. I think I mentioned this before, but people have asked. We are upgrading and updating our graphics on Daily Bible Study, and as a result, we removed everything, and we're just slowly reloading everything back again. And sometimes you'll see an image with no image on it, and that's the reason we're doing that. We're working our way through it. I actually have begun a number of things. I've got a couple places I have to go, a couple museums in Toronto that have displays for ancient things, and a lot of pictures. They permit pictures, and a lot of our new graphics are going to come from that. The Bible, you'll notice there's a new Bible picture on our main index page, right at the very top where it says Daily Bible Study. That is actually my RSV Bible. I took that picture, I put it down. There was a piece of white, a non-glare Bristol board. I laid my Bible on it, open, and took the picture, and there it is. And that's what that is. That's actually my RSV. A number of Bible sermons have been done with that Bible before we began using the King James exclusively. So I remember when I was at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto for the Dead Sea Scrolls exhibit, while I was waiting for that, I went through a large part of the rest of the museum, and they have very large collections of Roman and Greek and ancient Egypt exhibits, many models and things, just a vast amount of material that pictures can be taken of. So I'm going to be returning there, probably there for a day or two, and get a camera full of stuff that we can use for our new sets of graphics. I'm trying to do things that are more directly related to the material in the study, rather than something that's just merely a general illustration or something that is just not specific to that particular study. We want to be more heavy use of maps or illustrations of something. So that's what we're doing, and that's the reason things are what they are right now. I have no idea when that'll be done completely. There are many graphics. We have a large inventory of maps already, so that's good. We're using those. And I don't know when I'll be going to Toronto next. So, but when I go, there will be a massive amount of material, new graphics from that. But it's amazing how so much is available. It's ready. It's right there and ready to be used. So it's just as though whenever things are needed, there they are. It just seems to be happening that way. So I thought I would mention that. But it's the studies that don't yet have a graphic, or they have the old one. What we really did, we just reloaded them with a blank image. The individual graphics were reloaded, but not the page. So the page draws on a graphic without changing the page. We changed the graphics, and that's the reason what you're seeing there, rather than having to go back. We couldn't. There's no way I could go back and manually one by one over 4,000 studies. That's impossible now. There are things I wrote, studies I've written, that I'll never read again. They're on there, that's it, and there's no way I can go back to them, because I've got my hands full with each day's news study, plus the sermons and everything else, just keeping everything going. Email is a difficult, I won't say impossible task, but it's very difficult to keep up to it. And that's sort of something that bothers me, but there's only so many hours in a day, and our first priority, of course, is the studies and the sermons. Otherwise, the emails are irrelevant. They have to be. It's just a matter of priorities, and I think most people do understand that. So anyway, I thought I should mention that there's a very large number of new graphics coming. We're going to increase our map inventory as well. The sermons, again, we're looking to go video on that. We don't know when. There are actually a number of places you can go to do them, but I want to do it without any advertising because we have no control over what kind of advertisings would pop up, and that's my concern there. Who knows what could, if we put some of them on YouTube or something like that, you just don't know what would come of it. So it's going to have to be on our own servers, plainly, that we have exclusively on our own dedicated servers. Also, you may have noticed that I removed the it used to have for the sermons, there would be the title and then my name and then the website address. And I took off the website address. The older sermons still have it, of course, because they're there, but the newer ones don't anymore. One person asked about that, and the reason is because years from now, if people are still listening to these things and we're no longer producing them, we don't know what's going to happen to that domain. I just recently renewed it for 2 years. The domain registration, I could have put, I think the maximum is 10. Actually, I may do that. But even then, 10 years is 10 years. And, after that is after that. If we're not around to renew it. If it becomes available, then someone else could pick it up. Could purchase it directly from the registration authority, the same as I did. Even though the domain name was my idea. But someone else could buy it if it becomes available. If it were to fall into someone else's hands and they were doing something with it that was unbiblical, I don't want people to go back to that domain from a website address that's listed on the sermon at the present time. You can see there. I actually received an offer for the domain name a couple weeks ago because it would be someone who would want to use it, and I know they didn't want it for anything biblical. But I wouldn't sell it, of course, for any amount of money now because it's, that would be wrong. It's not the reason it was given to us to do. But it shows what people, the sort of the wolves and the jackals are out there looking for their chance, and we're just not going to give them one. I do have a sort of healthy amount of suspicion when people ask for things or want something. Not pessimism, but I think realism based on experience over the past 12 or 13 or 14 years doing this. I think Christ warned us of that, to be innocent as doves, to have the worldly smarts to be able to survive in order to do the job we've been given to do and not lose it just because things happen. I've got some pet doves. They're nice birds, beautiful birds, wonderful pets, very innocent, but if someone weren't protecting them, they wouldn't last a day. I mean, a cat can come along. I've got a couple of cats around there too, and the doves will look at the cat through the window. I, of course, can't let them get together, but the doves will look through the window at the cat as if, would you like to be my friend? And there's the cat just grinning, saying, I sure would. I could just love you to death, and because cats, they're nice, but they're not quite as innocent as doves when it comes to that sort of thing. So you understand what I mean. But anyway, there's new graphics coming, a whole lot of stuff coming. We're working hard for you in your service and in the Lord's service, and we're just going to keep doing what the Lord has given us to do. History and prophecy in the news for the week of January 17 to 23. January 17, 1377, Pope Gregory XI restored the papal see to Rome after it had been located in Avignon, France for 72 years. French Pope Clement V had moved it there in 1305 to escape political turmoil in Italy at the time. We'll put the links on for a number of studies we have about the political origin of the papacy, which was actually the Church of Rome is a very accurate term. That's exactly what it is, Church of the Roman Empire. But at the time, throughout its history, there have been struggles for control. At times there were 2 popes, at times there were 3 popes. They were sort of at war with each other. Murders happened, nasty things happened, and it was just so typical human nature, that organization, such as it is. We'll put the links on for those studies. January 17, 1957, Canada's last aircraft carrier, the HMCS Bonaventure, was commissioned. The 700-foot vessel was retired in 1969 by the then Liberal government. And actually, the Liberal government has not been a very big friend of the Canadian military. Another example, January 23, 1995, the 660 member of the Canadian Airborne Regiment was disbanded by the Liberals. The reasoning there is because they had been sent to Somalia as so-called peacekeepers, but they were not really trained as peacekeepers. The Canadian Airborne Regiment to us was like the 82nd Airborne is to Americans, and they're just not trained to keep the peace. They're trained to make the peace. And they did some things in Somalia that was really within their training, but not nice in terms of what they should have been doing, and it brought an investigation upon them, and they found out a number of things they were doing at their home base, which was actually close to Ottawa. They were actually the ones, if there was a great breakdown in civil order in Canada, that unit primarily was there positioned to defend the government, but the government became afraid of them. The Liberals were. And so they broke the unit. They didn't totally get rid of it, but instead of having it in a single 660-man unit, they broke it up into 3 or 4 pieces and dispersed it throughout the country. And so there goes our Canadian Airborne Regiment. Although in an emergency they could be brought back together again. So they haven't actually, I think gradually they're getting back together. But they had a long history going right back to the Second World War. D-Day and all that, a very honorable history, but the Liberal government just sort of forgot what they were trained to be, and these weren't Mary Poppins kind of people. They were killers. Let's face it, that's what they were sent to do, and if you send them into somewhere to make peace, it just doesn't work. Perhaps that in Haiti right now, there's a point where that sort of force is necessary because of the tremendous devastation, the total destruction of that country, and its chaos. And certainly military forces is justified there. People are criticizing the Americans because they went in. First thing they did, they conducted themselves as sort of like an invasion. They took over the airport and the presidential palace, but there is no government there right now. And the airport, again, the chaos that was there just to be able to get planes in. And we have, I think, 2,000 soldiers there, 2 warships. We actually had people there for quite some time. 2 Mounties were killed in the earthquakes, 2 that we know of. They were there helping the civil government before all of this started, and at least 2 Mounties died in the earthquake. And again, we have a connection as well. Our Governor General, the Governor General of Canada, was born in Haiti. She was born. We mentioned last week or 2 weeks ago how the U.S. presently has a black person as their head. Technically, we do as well in here because the Governor General, technically, it's largely ceremonial. It really doesn't have any political power. But technically, the Governor General represents our head of state, which is the Queen. So technically, she outranks the Prime Minister. Although, as I said, largely ceremonial, there's really no political power. This is from the Canadian Press. Just from a few days ago, Haitian-born Governor General Michelle Jean offered an emotional thank you to Canada today for moving so quickly to help her earthquake-ravaged homeland. A teary Jean, who came to Canada with her parents as an 11-year-old, said the devastation is heartbreaking for Haitian Canadians. She described the damage as being like an atomic bomb going off. She called for solidarity with the people of Haiti and urged them to be courageous. Canada is poised to send helicopter ships and a disaster response team to help Haitians left without food, water, shelter, and medical help after Tuesday's quake. So if you look at what the destruction there, it was just a horrendous destruction. And certainly they need to restore some order or they're not going to be able to get aid to people. It's natural. And I don't think anybody's interested in occupying Haiti for any long time. I don't think anybody would want to do that, considering what's left. It's just destroyed. People are having big problems there. The number of deaths that occurred, and earthquakes are prophesied in the Bible. There's going to be such great earthquakes like that all around the world. It's going to happen, and things like this. You have to be aware, if you aren't already, that this sort of thing is going to happen wherever you live as well. It isn't just a matter of the very normal, quote-unquote, places where earthquakes can be expected. They're going to be happening in a lot of places, including the land of Israel. I mean, right at the time of Christ's return, you're going to see the earthquake happen there that's going to actually split the Mount of Olives. The powerful there. The Jordan Valley is actually an earthquake zone. It marks an earthquake fault. That's really why the Jordan Valley is there. It marks that fault. The Jordan River would not exist if not for that earthquake fault that's underneath of it, marking that valley in there. So the tragedy of the loss of life, certainly our prayers are for Haiti today, are for the people, the tremendous suffering of Haiti. But the world that is coming, all of the people who have been lost, they are going to live again. That doesn't make the suffering any easier, but it is a reality that suffering is not just the end of everything, and it's going to be a world in which there aren't going to be any more tears. But in the meantime, this is going to happen. It's just a reality, and I wouldn't say we have to harden ourselves to it, but we have to be aware of it in order to just be able to get through what we have to know, what we know we have to get through when the time comes. Because it's going to be happening here, folks. Wherever you are, wherever your here is, it's going to be happening. Things far more like it. Just as much like it. So it's something we have to be aware of and learn to be able to cope with. January 18, 1871, the proclamation of the German Second Reich. Bismarck named King Wilhelm I of Prussia as German Emperor in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles near Paris. North and South Germany united. Bismarck consolidated Germany under the Protestant Prussian Hohenzollern. Bismarck assumed the office of Reich Chancellor and was made a prince. The Second Reich lasted for 47 years until the end of the First World War in 1918. And we'll cover some of that today in our sermon, the First and Second World Wars. But that's the reason that Hitler called his empire the Third Reich, because that was the second, and the First Reich was before that. Farther back in the time of Otto, and so on, we'll put the link on for the Holy Roman Empire, why it was called that, and why it was German, not Roman at all. January 18, 1974, Israel and Egypt signed a peace agreement to officially end the Yom Kippur War, which began on the previous October the 6th. And that was the closest one that Israel ever came to losing. It was a surprise attack on the Day of Atonement. Very close. Israel was closer to using their nukes at any time in that war than they had at any time ever since, and hopefully never will. According to the Bible, we don't think they will. Jerusalem's still going to exist. The world's still going to exist. There is no nuclear war prophesied, at least the result of it, because the world is not going to end, but there's going to be a lot of devastation. And again, that is also something we have to just learn to be aware of and familiar with. January 22, 1899, an apostolic letter by Pope Leo XIII condemned Americanism, quote-unquote, which he defined as the adaptation of the church to modern civilization. And certainly that can go around the world. And he, of all people, claiming to adapting the church to modern civilization, because the Church of Rome is like a chameleon. Wherever they are around the world, they've adapted to all sorts of cultures, all sorts of things. You can more or less be whatever you want as long as you look to the Pope as your leader. That's really what it comes down to. So for them to be pointing the finger at anybody, it's a typical human nature, of course, typical hypocrisy. But they, of all people, have no moral ground to be criticizing others about doing that sort of thing. We live in a world that is yet to come to its final chapter. But human nature, if you read human nature, look at human nature, and again we'll cover some of this in our sermon today, how it's really every chapter is the same. It's just a matter of different players, different characters repeating the same script of human nature. And how people really have not changed since the time of Adam and Eve. Since they changed, that is, because they weren't what they became. They became what they became because they got the attitude of doing as they please and thinking God is going to be pleased with them no matter what they do. And it doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. And people have yet to learn that as a whole around the world. Converted people, those who repented and tried to be true Christians, have learned that lesson, or at least have become aware of that lesson, because otherwise we don't understand the purpose of repenting or the need for it. Because there are a lot of people who are Christians who don't believe in repentance. They just claim to be Christian. They claim Christ's name, but don't really do anything about it, and actually disdainfully look down upon those who do try to obey Christ. They say that that's wrong. That's against grace. But it's not. We'll put the link on for Grace into Licentiousness. History in the news is prophecy in the news. It's all the same book. Imagine a situation in which a foreign leader is coming to visit a country that he, in effect, occupies. He is an emperor, which means sort of king of kings or president of presidents. He is making a visit, an official visit, to one of his capital cities. But the people there are plotting to kill him. They're plotting an assassination. So a number of them, a team of assassins is put together. They're young, they're inexperienced, but they're dedicated to their nationalism. And they're going to strike back at this foreign leader who's come to their country. The team of assassins is spread throughout the city. They're not entirely sure of the route. Sometimes security people change routes at the last moment. They want to be sure. So they're working as individuals. The emperor arrives. He's in an open automobile, convertible. He and his wife are in the back seat, and he drives right past one of the assassins. And this one has a bomb, small bomb or a grenade of some sort. He throws it. It hits the side of the automobile, bounces off, lands on the street, explodes, but instead of injuring the target, it injures two of the security people. The emperor's car keeps right on going. He's uninjured. The event comes to nothing. Word quickly spreads through the city that an assassination attempt has been made. The other would-be assassins hear of it, and their reaction is, well, we failed. The emperor is not going to be sent out now. Surely his visit is going to be canceled, or he's going to remain somewhere that's safe where we aren't going to be able to get at him, so we better just get out of town. And that's what they set out to do. By that time, however, it was later in the day. They were hungry, so one of them stopped at a sandwich shop or sidewalk cafe, and he bought himself a sandwich. He was standing there having his lunch, considering himself to be a total failure as an assassin. He was going to eat his sandwich and go home, when lo and behold, he sees the emperor's car coming with the emperor in it, because not only had they not taken extra care to protect the emperor, they actually sent him back out on the street. And the driver of his car got lost in the city. He went down the wrong street, and guess what street he went down? The very street in which this would-be assassin was standing. And more than that, not only did this assassin get a chance at a moving target, the driver of the automobile, realizing he was lost, stopped in order to back up to a corner where he wanted to go down, and guess where he stopped? Right in front of the assassin. So here's this would-be killer standing there with a sandwich in his hand, thinking himself as a failure, when suddenly his target not only drives down the street, but actually stops right in front of him. So the would-be assassin drops his sandwich, pulls out his gun, and fires 2 shots. Just 2. He had a pistol. He should have emptied the clip, but he fired only twice. One of the bullets missed the emperor and hit the emperor's wife. The other bullet found its mark. Both of them died from those single shots in an event that seems so unlikely that it should be something out of a comedy movie. But the fact is, it really happened. It was an event that triggered the First World War. I'm basing that information on the First World War book by Professor Hugh Strachan. It was an excellent book. It was also made into a DVD series, and it is factually correct. And he went into far more detail than you will read in most history books about it. They usually just pass over that reality, what actually happened that day, with 1 or 2 sentences. It was the assassination of the Archduke Francis Ferdinand by Gavrilo Princip, a young man who was perhaps as lucky as he was incompetent as an assassin. Sort of like the Barney Fife of assassins. He had to walk around with his bullet in his pocket because he kept blowing the bottom out of his holster, shooting himself in the foot. And this guy would have been very much the same thing. But look what he did. And it triggered the First World War. Now you may say, well, what's that got to do with a sermon? What's that got to do with the Bible? We're here to study the Bible, Bible history, Christianity, prophecy. Well, actually, the First and Second World Wars of Europe, because they were actually European wars that spread around the world. No other wars have done that, not in which nations, actual groups of nations, have fought each other all around the world. It's never happened, First and Second World War. And it was triggered by an incompetent or lucky or fateful assassin. Because the chances of that happening, I mean, just consider what he did. And by the way, he was his instructor. He had a pistol instructor. He was one of the worst shots in the world. There were times he would go out and shoot at trees and miss the trees. He not only couldn't score well in target practice, oftentimes he missed the target. He did it. The result was like a pro. And yet he was totally incompetent. It was almost as though it had to happen. And if you look at the odds of something like that happening, the getting lost, the driver going down not only the wrong street, but the right street for the assassin, and not only driving right by, moving, because chances are this guy, I mean, he could barely hit a standing target, let alone a moving one, but stopping right in front of this guy while he's standing there with a sandwich in his hand having his lunch. And even then, not only did he stop, when the driver saw the situation evolving and happening, he rammed the car into reverse, an old-style transmission. He actually locked the gears. The car couldn't move forward or backwards or any direction for a few more moments. So it was like a sitting duck target right in front of this man. Imagine the odds of that happening, just if it was just sheer luck. And yet it happened. And that assassination triggered a war in which tens of millions of people died. It brought down the Ottoman Empire, which at that time was occupying Israel. And we'll get to the reason. I'm explaining why we're talking about world wars 1 and 2 as a matter of a sermon, as a matter of Christianity, as a matter of prophecy, as a matter of Bible history. It brought about the decline and fall of the Ottoman Empire, which at the time was holding on to the land of Israel, occupying the land of Israel. Britain from that time moved in, and it was Britain that enabled the people of Judah to gain a foothold in their own land, so they were able to fight for their independence in 1948, years later. The emperor who was assassinated, we often speak of the beast power, the Holy Roman Emperors. Well, his family were the Holy Roman Emperors. He was the heir to that throne, the heir apparent. He's in his 50s at that time. He was treated royally. He lived the life of a royal. I saw one DVD about him. He was an avid hunter. He shot over 200,000 animals in hunting and kept them all. He had them all stuffed and actually numbered. There's a palace that you can go in Europe today and see his 200,000 numbered heads, trophies that he shot during his life before he himself was shot as a trophy by someone who very likely wasn't as good a shot as he was. But you see how history is almost comical in a way, and yet something, even though humans may be incompetent, they can do something that perhaps was destined to be. Because, if that assassination had not happened, the modern state of Judah would not have come about in the way it did, at the very least, because the Ottomans wouldn't have declined and fell. And they wouldn't have permitted the people of Judah the way the people of Britain did to gain a foothold there. And as well, the First World War, from the perspective of Germany, was unfinished business. It was really just a continuation of the same war. And Hitler himself was another prefigure, a more accurate one actually, of that Holy Roman Emperor who was going to be the beast power at the end time. And of course the Holocaust was the final straw in which the people of Judah were to return. And their return means there will be a Jewish holy place built in which the abomination of desolation will occur. And there are many other connections, biblical connections, direct fulfillments of prophecy that happened over those two wars. We don't have time to go into all of them today. We'll put on a link for the number of the studies that relate to them. And it happened almost in a most unlikely way, but it happened almost as if it had to. And I think it did. I think a lot of those events had to happen. It brought about Those two wars brought about the United States into becoming a superpower. Because at that time, the United States was a very different place. They were very much taking Washington's advice. I don't mean Washington the city, I mean Washington the man, in which he warned against foreign entanglements. Don't get involved in European wars. And for the most part, that advice was followed. And even the First World War, the United States was only in it the last 18 months. They stayed out. After a number of provocations that certainly wouldn't be passed by today, the sinking of the Lusitania, other things, direct provocations. And the Second World War, same thing. It was on for over 2 years before the United States entered, and only then because of Pearl Harbor. It's almost like the United States was being held in a holding pattern until such time that its turn came to play its hand, in order for the time yet future comes when that normal and natural course of rise and fall of empires will have taken place. Because, we don't read of the First World War or the Second World War in prophecy, but we read about the players. We read about the results. We read about the original prophecies that describe the return of the people of Judah to their land, and eventually all of Israel. The gathering of Israel, Judah is going to happen. The people of Judah, for the most part, they've got a foothold. The first wave, the pioneers have returned. And the abomination of desolation, very important part of prophecy, very specific. Jesus Christ spoke specifically of it, and it wouldn't happen if there were no Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And that would never have happened under the Ottomans. Events that really had to happen. Sort of a resetting of the stage. And it was reset. We're seeing still the result of it today. Now let's have a quick look at those two wars. It's difficult to find a concise listing, something that is neutral, but I found one. It's from the Concise Columbia Desk Encyclopedia. It has two very brief, very concise, and quite good, unbiased, matter-of-fact sort of summations of those two wars. But it all began just exactly, as I said, an incompetent terrorist. So let's have a look at that today. History isn't just dry and dead. It can be very interesting. It can be very bizarre in its ironies. It can be very much something that things just don't seem to be happening in the way that they do or should, and yet they do anyway, despite things that just everything else points in the other direction. And it's as though there's a river. There can be a bend in the river, or a tree can fall over across a river, but the water's going to go where it's going to go anyway. It'll dig another channel, it'll go over top, it'll push the tree out of the way, it'll do whatever it needs to do. And events of history are really water in that river of time, in which a little farther downriver is prophecy. It's really what it comes down to. Time and history and prophecy, it's all the same thing. And the First and Second World Wars of Europe are in themselves, and were in themselves, I say are because we're still seeing the results of it, the fruit of it, very much a fulfillment of prophecy. Let's have a quick look. This is from the, just a quick quote from the Columbia Viking Desk Encyclopedia. Very concise, very brief record of the First World War. It also has one for the second, but the reason I'm doing this today is so that you can realize the biblical connection. There's nothing in this world that is not connected ultimately to either the Lord's creation or the flow of time, the flow of events that's going to bring about Christ's return and the need for it. Because this sort of thing, the world is, it's almost like, it's so comical, it's amazing we're still alive. I mean, here we have all these toys of destruction in our hands, nuclear weapons and all sorts of other things, and we haven't destroyed ourselves yet. So, it goes both ways, and sometimes the stage has to be rearranged in such a way, and you have to clear away things, and you have to do it quickly. You can't let it go on for a while. So war sort of does that. But it's just amazing how people don't realize the Lord's hand is in so many things, including the First and Second World Wars, because there are events there that cleared the stage, that made things happen in such a way that will permit the end-time beast power to rise on its own, clearly, seemingly as the good guy, because all the other good guys by that time will have run their course, will have played their hand in such a way that it's like a politician. They come in very, very popular, but after they've been around for a while, things that they do, regardless of good intent or not, start to grate on people, so they lose support. It's just familiarity breeds contempt, the old saying. And that had to happen, or has to happen, in order for that end-time beast power to seem so good, to seem like such a shining light, and the only one that's available. So it all happens, it all has a purpose. But just consider, very briefly here, this is the First World War. World War First, 1914 to 18. The immediate cause of conflict was the assassination on June 28, 1914 of Archduke Francis Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary at Sarajevo by a Serbian nationalist. Now, just to interject there, that was it. That's the sentence. And that's typical of most history books. They don't even name the guy, let alone that how he was such a complete comedy of errors, almost. Although there was nothing funny about what he did. He murdered 2 people, and he triggered a war that set off the deaths of tens of millions of other people. But the fact is, such an incompetent individual did that, or triggered that, which would seem to indicate there was more to it than that. And we'll get to this. Continuing. Hostilities began slowly, but by the end of summer 1914, the Allies, that is, England, France, Russia, Belgium, Serbia, Montenegro, and Japan, were involved in a general conflict with the Central Powers, that is, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. And we're going to have a sermon coming up on the Ottoman Empire. At that time, they were occupying the land of Israel. They were preventing the people of Judah from ever getting a foothold there. They had to go in order for the people of Judah to get a foothold, in order for them to create the modern-day state of Israel, which in turn would have the people of Judah build that holy place where the abomination of desolation is going to happen. The Ottomans had to go. Continuing. And they did because they chose the wrong side. Continuing. On the Western Front, Germany occupied Belgium and advanced on Paris. After the First Battle of the Marne and the First Battle of Ypres, there was a military stalemate and grueling trench warfare for 3 years. On the Eastern Front, the Germans under Hindenburg, Ludendorff, and Meckelson defeated August to September 1914 the Russians at Tannenberg and the Moranian Lakes. Russian counterattack failed in 1916, and the Russian Revolution eliminated Russia as a useful ally. And to interject there, the German agents were very much a part of supporting Lenin. Lenin wasn't even in the country. German agents got him back in so he could stir things up and trigger the Russian Revolution, because they knew if this guy could get power, he would pull Russia out of the war. And he did. That's exactly what happened. Continuing. Bulgaria joined, October 1915, the Central Powers. Serbia and Montenegro fell by the end of 1915. The Allied Gallipoli campaign, 1915, against Turkey was a failure. Italy joined in May 1915 the Allies, but Italian fighting was indecisive until the rout at Caporetto in 1917, which was not upset by the Italian victory of Vittorio Veneto in 1918. The year 1916 saw little real change in the Western Front, despite huge casualties in battles of Verdun and the Somme offensive. Portugal and Romania joined the Allies in 1916. Greece, involved by the Salonika campaigns, declared war on the Central Powers in 1917. U.S. neutrality had been imperiled in 1915 by the sinking of the Lusitania. And just to interject there, the United States at that time was very much following Washington's advice. I don't mean Washington the city, I mean Washington the man. His warning against becoming involved in foreign entanglements, particularly wars in Europe. And what was George Washington basing that on? The example of Britain. He knew. The empire, he understood why it was in trouble, why things happened, and he didn't want that to happen. His idea of independence was independence from the rest of the world. Don't get tangled up in everybody else's mess. And for the United States, in the First World War, they didn't. They did not. They did not enter that war until the last 18 months. And again, they ignored a number of provocations which would never go to pass today. Imagine if a U.S. liner was sunk. There would be retaliation. It's sort of like what's happening to the airliners today, the airline business. Because the term so-called anti-Americanism in the world, there's supposed to be all this anti-Americanism in the world. It's actually new as far as Americans are concerned, but the anti-isms, in terms of what happens to empires as they mature, it's very old. I mean, anti-Americanism used to be called anti-Britishism. The American people themselves would understand that because their nation was formed out of that anti-ism, anti-Britishism. But even then, there have been many others. There's been anti-Germanism, there's been anti-Francism, Frenchism, anti-Dutchism. If you look at the Bible, there have been anti-Egyptism, anti-Assyrianism, anti-Babylonism, anti-Persianism, anti-Greekism, all the things of the distant past. Anti-Romanism, well, that's sort of a special case because we know it's going to have one more go, as we said. And you don't want to be that one. You certainly want to get out of the way when that one happens, don't you? Because that's the one that's going to be crushed. And that's the one that's going to be directly possessed by Satan. It's going to be the seat of his power. It's going to be the focus of Christ's wrath. And you don't want to be that. So it's something that's coming, and all the isms, we'll put the link on for the study, the coming world dictator. He's going to wipe away all the isms of this world, all the anti-empire isms, and all the religious ism, Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, and Protestantism, and Buddhism, and Hinduism. All the isms are going to be wiped away because there is coming the truth. But as far as the wrath is concerned, it's best if it's in your destiny to be an empire, it's best to get it done and over with and out of the way before the end time one happens, because that's not the good place to be when that's coming. We'll put the link on for that study. But it's understanding. You have to understand it from history. And most people don't have that desire to learn. It's not a matter of ability to learn. It's just a matter of wanting to. Because most people really aren't much interested in things that happened before they came along. For most people, history is their lifetime. And sort of what came before, well, that's just ancient. But it really isn't, because most of what is ancient really isn't. It's still happening or yet to be fulfilled in completeness. So it's a perspective of history, again, to understand prophecy, because really it's the same thing. But the anti-isms, that's not new either. It's old. Every empire has had it. And very ironically, a lot of isms or anti-isms turned into empires themselves. That's happened a number of times. Even Israel, the number of times that they were subjected to empires, they themselves became an imperial empire. With the link on for that study. During the time of David and Solomon, Israel was an imperial power in the Middle East, the people's countries. So at that time there was anti-Israelism because they were having their turn. So it's an old thing. Some historians think that the imperial stage of a nation, or the part of the existence of a nation, occurs at its end as it declines. But I disagree with that, because most of the great empires that have existed continue to exist today. Greece was a great empire, and Greece is still there. In Persia, the great Persian Empire, Iran's still there. All those great empires existed. Britain, its time as an empire, existed for a long time. It ended, but Britain's still there. So, I think if anything, it doesn't happen during a nation's infancy because it doesn't yet have the power. It's not yet standing on its own 2 feet. I think imperialism happens during its adolescence, if anything, because when the imperial stage ends, it goes into a long life afterward of maturity. And most of the nations, very few nations actually die out, but their imperial era ends during its adolescence. So perhaps when a nation is more adventurous, it's probably the reason the best combat soldiers, frontline combat soldiers, are little more than adolescents, teenagers, because they're adventurous. They think they're invincible, and it takes a while to realize they're not. And when you get older, you become too cautious. So it sort of makes sense that you can apply it to an individual, but you can apply it to nations as well, because nations are people. So it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. But again, it's a good thing to have it done and over with before the end time comes, because what's coming, what Christ is bringing upon the empires of this world, is going to be a horrendous thumping, because the world as a whole, led by that focal point of Satan's empire in Europe, the so-called Holy Roman Empire, we'll put the link on for that study. The European imperialism as a whole seems to be the one exception to that rule. It's the only one, really, that it continues to keep coming back. And he's going to try to fight Christ. And his wrath is going to be inflicted upon that entity as a whole or around the world when it happens. Mostly through deception. But again, people who are deceived can be still salvaged, because that's what salvation means in their time. Resurrection to physical life. That's really what the later physical resurrection is all about. So it's not a hopeless thing. It's all about hope. But we have to get through this mess that the world has become because of Satan's influence. Continuing. The German fleet had been bottled up since the indecisive Battle of Jutland. Germany had announced in 1916 the decision to begin unrestricted submarine warfare. The U.S. broke off relations, declared war on April 6, 1917 on Germany. So again, the United States was pushed into that war. Pushed. After a number of provocations. Sort of like in a holding pattern. And that continued. That did not end with the First World War. It continued in the Second, because the same thing happened. Not being tangled up in foreign wars was very much a part of the government of the United States at that time. It wasn't just a matter of Woodrow Wilson in the First World War. It was true as well in the Second World War with Roosevelt. And again, a number of provocations were ignored until Pearl Harbor happened. But again, you see, it was sort of like there was this superpower waiting to happen, but just being held in check, waiting for its time, for it to rise. It's like a politician. Again, to use that analogy, the popularity was there, but after it's been in office for a while, you just sort of grate on people's nerves. You lose support on the supporter. You see that in countries all the time. People can be elected just seeming like such a savior when they're first elected, and 4 years later the people are ready to throw tomatoes at them. And it's the same old thing. Doesn't mean the politician is any different. It's just that you can't please everybody all the time. It's the old story. So you can see why that had to happen. Why you can read in Revelation 13 this seemingly wonderful power in Europe just seeming like such the good guy. The hearts and minds are going to be pointed there, because the hearts and minds will have been expended elsewhere. And again, because it doesn't mean the European power is going to be any better, because the same thing would happen to them. It's going to happen to them, but they'll never find out, because Christ is going to return and blow it all away, put an end to all those kingdoms. But you can see how the developments are there. And that's not just theory. You can see a number of things that continued on. How the First and Second World Wars were really the same war, as far as Germany is concerned. But continue. The U.S. broke off relations, declared war on April 6, 1917 on Germany. American Expeditionary Force under General Pershing landed in France, but did not participate in any important action until Chateau Thierry battle in June 1918. And that was the last year of the war. Isn't that amazing? Continue. T.E. Lawrence sterned Arab revolt against Turkey. Baghdad and Jerusalem fell in 1917. Now, T.E. Lawrence, everybody's heard of Lawrence Arabia. Many people don't realize he was a real man. T.E. Lawrence, he was a British officer, a British agent. He was helping the Arabs, supposedly, but what he was helping them do was to rebel against the Ottomans, because the Ottoman Empire was very big. It was controlling the land of Israel. It was controlling the Middle East. Oil was not yet a big deal, but it was soon to become that, because 1917, automobiles, airplanes, so on, just becoming invented. There wasn't the great demand yet, but they realized as an imperial force it had to go. And notice what it says here. Baghdad and Jerusalem fell in 1917. So the British marched into Baghdad. Where have you heard that before in recent years? Not by the British as much as the U.S. forces, but again, at the end of the Second World War, as we'll get to, the U.S. became, somewhat reluctantly, having to fulfill or fill in the vacuum caused by the British Empire's decline, which really Britain was bankrupted by those two wars. But continuing. And again here, the Arab revolt against Turkey, that is referring to the Ottoman Empire. They had to go in order for the people of Judah to get a foothold, and the British people enabled them. Continuing. The unified Allied commander under Foch was created in April 1918. The Central Powers signed in March 1980 the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Russia. The Germans were stopped just short of Paris in the Second Battle of the Marne. The Allied counterattack was successful. Bulgaria, Turkey, and Austria-Hungary surrendered. After revolt broke out in Germany, an armistice was signed on November 11, 1918 at Copenhagen. War and resulting peace treaties of Versailles, Saint-Germain, Trianon-Neuilly, and Sevres radically changed the face of Europe. Warfare itself had been revolutionized. Suffering caused by the war, conservative estimates of losses is 10 million dead, 20 million wounded, and brought on a general revulsion, led many to put their trust in the newly formed League of Nations. And of course, we all know now how effective that was. It failed. It became the United Nations after the Second World War. But you can see there, all of that was triggered, no pun intended, by one incompetent assassin, or terrorist as he might be called today. But look at what had to be done. The rearrangement, because really what the First World War did was to take out the Ottoman Empire. It permitted the British to take over the land of Israel, which permitted the people of Judah to get a foothold, to reroot themselves in their own land, so that at the end of the Second World War, as we'll get to here, they were ready to declare independence, and the modern state of Judah, or Israel, was about to take root. And from that, we see today the modern state of Israel. Soon, I believe, at some point, relatively soon, you're going to see them move beyond the mere preparations to build a temple, and I think it's going to be triggered by the Ark of the Covenant being found. I think it's there. Many people realize it's there. Anyone who reads the Bible knows it has to be there. It can't be anywhere else. But again, it wouldn't matter if the people of Judah weren't there. And when the Ark was found, if it were just the Arab peoples or the Ottomans, they wouldn't care. They would take it to the dump. Because today, the Muslims up on the Temple Mount, they're finding things, artifacts and things, and they are literally taking them to the dump. That's literally what they're doing. And at that time, if the Ark was found, chances are the Wailing Wall could, due to an earthquake or whatever, could just crack open or fall open, and there could be one of those tunnels right there. They don't even have to go up on top of the Temple Mount. The Ark could be found, could be taken, it could be put literally into a tent, because that's what it was out in the Sinai, just a tent made of animal skins and curtains. And yet it was a very holy place, and if it's in there, that would fulfill that end-time prophecy. But the people of Judah had to be there, and they wouldn't if not for the First World War and the Second. It was a two-stage thing, but again, as far as Germany is concerned, and as far as much of Europe is concerned, there really was no First and Second. It was the war. It was one. It just sort of had a recess in between. But you see the biblical connection? Those aren't coincidences. That's reality. Let's have a look at the second. Just a quick quote. And consider the biblical implications of this. And keeping in mind the Holocaust happened, which was sort of the final straw for the return of the people of Judah to their land. It was something that most nations, even those that had been opposing it, sort of got that out of their system. They realized that the people of Judah should return home, and that again in itself is a part, as we said, of the fulfillment of prophecy. Not only that, just their return, because the greatest return hasn't happened yet, because that will happen when both Judah and Israel return, when really it will be the land of Israel, truly, not just the land of Judah. But consider. Brief quote from the Columbia Viking Dust Encyclopedia. World War II, 1939 to 45. Chief political events leading to the war were the aggressive policies of the principal Axis powers, Germany, Italy, Japan, culminating in the German seizure of Bohemia and Moravia in March 1939. The Western powers, Britain and France, after crowning their appeasement policy with the Munich Pact in 1938, began to rearm and extended guarantees to other possible victims of aggression, notably to Poland. While Hitler demanded the return of Danzig and the Polish corridor, the USSR concluded a non-aggression pact with Germany in August 1939. Hitler thus was left free to break off negotiations and attack Poland on September the 1st. England, joined by nearly all members of the British Commonwealth, and France declared war on Germany. German lightning tactics, or blitzkrieg, won a quick victory in Poland. In the west, the British and French spent an inactive winter behind the Maginot Line. In April 1940, Germany invaded and occupied Denmark and Norway. In May, it overran the Low Countries, broke into France, swept to the Channel ports, and cut off the Allies who were evacuated from Dunkirk. And a lot of people realize the miracle that happened there, the evacuation, thousands of troops got across the Channel. It was one of the most calm mirror surface channels ever. People who lived along the coast all their lives had never seen it before. At the same time, there was heavy overcast. The German Air Force could not get into the air for the most part, because if they could, they would have ripped those little boats to pieces, because practically everything that could float was sent across the Channel. Just pleasure boats. The call went out, Winston needs boats. And just ordinary folks crossed the Channel and picked up troops. It was rightfully called, I think, the miracle of Dunkirk. Continuing, Italy entered the war June 10th. On June 22, France surrendered. England, under Churchill's leadership, fought on alone, and in the Battle of Britain resisted the German attempt to bomb it into submission. And the devastation there, of course, the bombing of London, just horrendous, night after night after night, being bombed. Continuing, land operations continued in North Africa, where Italy attacked the British, and in the Balkans, where Italy attacked Greece, October 1940, and where Germany, Hungary, and Bulgaria invaded Yugoslavia, April 1941. The first round appeared to be won by the Axis, and on June 22, 1941, Hitler launched the invasion of the USSR. To interject there, the biggest blunder he made in the war, he should have left Russia alone, but he didn't, because it wasn't because he was not able to defeat them militarily, but because his troops went in and they froze to death, literally froze to death from the Russian winter. Continuing, meanwhile, the U.S. was gradually drawing closer to the war. And again, to repeat, the United States followed and was still following George Washington's, not Washington the city, but George Washington's advice to stay away from other people's wars, foreign entanglements. Washington warned of it. He understood it. And for most of U.S. history, that's exactly what happened. But again, at the end of the war, it was sort of a de facto vacuum that was left, because the British Empire was dwindling to the point where it was bankrupted. Britain was bankrupted. And all these other places had to be fulfilled. Russia, for example. It was either a choice on the U.S. to either not intervene in Europe and stay, or allow Russia to just simply take Europe, which they would have done. That's what the Iron Curtain was really a border between those two philosophies. And of course, the Middle East, by the time of the Second World War, oil was becoming a major factor. They say the Middle East wars are not about oil. Well, they are. I mean, look at Iraq. That's becoming very plain again. But it was a difference that had to happen, and the time was just right, for example, because at the end of the war, Israel was born, and who became the number one benefactor of Israel? The United States. So you see how it all curves around? Continuing. Meanwhile, the U.S. was gradually drawing closer to the war. Congress voted to lend lease aid to England in 1941, and to protect its shipping, the U.S. occupied Iceland and Greenland. Japanese aggression in Indochina and Thailand led to extreme tension. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the Philippine Islands, and Malaya. The U.S., followed by most of the Allies, except the USSR, declared war on Japan. Germany and its allies, except Finland, declared war on the U.S. By 1942, Japan had conquered the Philippines, many other Pacific islands, and all Southeast Asia. In Russia, the Axis forces had reached Stalingrad and the Caucasus. In Africa, General Rommel seemed about to take Cairo. In naval warfare, German submarines threatened to wipe out all Allied shipping. At this dark hour, the Allies rallied, and in a series of victories, turned the tide. In North Africa, Montgomery's victory at El Alamein in October 1942, followed by the U.S. landing in Algeria, resulted in total victory over the Axis forces. The Allied conquest of Sicily and southern Italy, and Italy's surrenders, September 1943. In the Pacific, the U.S. won the naval battles of Coral Sea and Midway, landed at Guadalcanal in 1942, and under the leadership of General Douglas MacArthur and Admirals Halsey and Nimitz began the island-hopping strategy, which by 1945 had won back the Philippines and brought a striking force to Japan's doorstep at Iwo Jima in Okinawa. And it looks like we're going to go just a few minutes overtime today, but I really do want to finish this to understand the perspective of why these wars happen from the perspective of the Bible, and it is clear. Continuing. In Russia, the victory of Stalingrad in 1943 was followed by the mighty Russian drive, which by 1944 brought Russian armies deep into Poland and Hungary and drove the Axis forces out of the Balkans. The Battle of the Atlantic ended with the virtual extermination of German submarines. In central Italy, the Allies met stubborn German resistance and slow, grueling warfare set in. But on June 6, 1944, the Allies, under the command of General Eisenhower, landed in Normandy, and in August the Second Allied force landed in southern France. By late 1944, France and Belgium were liberated. The war was carried into the Netherlands and Germany. Allied air power was annihilating Germany's industrial centers. In April 1945, German resistance collapsed. On May 7, Germany surrendered unconditionally. In August, the U.S. dropped the first atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Russia declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria. Japan announced its surrender on August 14, signed September 2, 1945. The fighting was over. The world's material and human losses were incalculable. Bombing of cities and German attempts at genocide, especially of Jews, had killed millions of civilians. The war spurned decolonization, led to formation of the United Nations, and set the stage for the Cold War. End of quote. But it also set the stage for the world as it is. The world as it must be as we proceed toward the end. And if you understand prophecy, you can read history with the light switched on. Thank you for joining us for services this week. As always, your being with us makes our joy complete. Until next week, when we meet again on this, God's holy Sabbath day, may the Lord bless thee and keep thee. May the Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. God bless you all.